For us today, two presentations, discussions, both on the same topic of gun violence in America and gun violence prevention. First we have Elaine Arndt. She's the Montgomery County Moms Man Action co-lead. She recently moved from her position as community outreach co-lead. She's been a volunteer for Moms Man Action for 5 years and has helped the organization to grow to over 6 million supporters nationwide. Has worked on Capitol Hill in private industry and has held a variety of volunteer leadership positions focusing on schools and youth development. She moved from Northern California 10 years ago and has returned to Montgomery County after growing up in the Rockville area. Following her, there will be our own Jan McNamara, Parishioner. Many of you may know. Jan, did I say, I did, okay, sorry. Jan, her husband, and her 2 children have been members of St. John's for 6 years. She became actively involved in gun violence prevention after losing her brother-in-law, Jan McNamara, in the Capitol Gazette shooting in June 2018. Jan is the interfaith lead for Montgomery County Moms Demand Action and is a member of our St. John's Gun Violence Prevention Committee. She's a lifelong resident of Montgomery County and works at Imagination Stage in Bethesda. And off over at the table, well, there she is, going to the table, is Julianne from Moms Man's Action. So she brought some material and information so all of you can have that when this ends and pick up good information and see what to do. And now Elaine will start us off to tell us about it and what we can do.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gary. Can you hear me? Is this on? Okay, thanks. I want to first say thank you to Reverend Sari and Reverend Ann for giving us this time together. It's a real privilege to be here. I've worked with Margaret and the Gun Violence Prevention Committee for a couple of years now. We've done activities together, the forum series, and then our Wear Orange event. We got super support from this team. So we wanted to say thank you very much for our time here, and I always feel welcome here. So thanks again for coming. I'm Elaine Arndt. I'm the Montgomery County Moms Demand Action co-lead and recently in that position, so we're still learning the ropes. We have a Montgomery County team, and we are always looking for people who are interested in gun violence prevention. So I want to take this time, and again, I want to say thank you. During Advent is such a time for me of internal reflection and anticipation of something important. What I'm going to talk about is external, but still has an element of moral importance that I think we all appreciate in this room. So thanks again for taking the time during a season of very deep reflection. What I'm going to do is briefly describe Moms Demand Action, talk about the legislation that's coming up, both on the Maryland level and on the federal level, and answer questions as well at the end of the program. So we'll be able to have a little conversation at the end if you have questions. We, first of all, to get started, Moms Demand Action is a nonpartisan, nonprofit, grassroots organization. It was founded in the aftermath of the Sandy Hook shooting, which will be 7 years ago next week. Our founder, Shannon Watts, posted a Facebook page. That Facebook page drew 50,000 followers almost immediately. In that 7 years, there's been a growth to, as Gary mentioned, 6 million supporters. We have chapters in every state, plus DC. So there is a movement, there is a change in the wind, and we want to be there to help facilitate that change. I wanted to also say that Shannon and all of us are unpaid volunteers. There's some differences on Twitter being said that these are paid people. If any of you came expecting a paycheck to be here today for Moms Demand Action, it's not there. So just letting you know. So how do we do this work? What does it involve? First of all, we include people who have been affected by gun violence, people who haven't been affected by gun violence but are in disproportionately affected groups, people who are just interested in it. Veterans, for example, are highly susceptible now to suicide risk. So we want to make sure to include their voices in our organization. So we want to include people of racial and religious diversity who also may be subject to gun violence in disproportionate numbers. We educate on the laws that are in effect. Maryland now has an extreme risk protection order law that was not in place a year ago, and it is in place now. We want to get the word out on that, and we'll be talking about that in a few minutes. In addition, we have a Be Smart program. This helps people who either own guns in their homes and want to secure them safely. This gives them the tools to do that. But it also, if you are just, say, going on a play date and want to, or your child's going on a play date, or your grandchild's going on a play date, and you want to say, are there guns in the home, in a way that is not going to be off-putting or cause an issue, we have a methodology for doing that as well. We want to just make this conversation about the safety of families and not about a political issue. We also advocate to our legislators to make sure they're aware of the latest gun research. We have behind us everytown.org, and the Everytown research team provides a substantial amount of research accumulated from the CDC and the FBI. They put it together so that we can present it in a way that's effective. The important thing is that legislators have a lot on their plate. We want to make sure this is number one. We also empower people gun violence survivors, to be able to tell their stories. We have a survivor program a survivor fellow program where people apply. We accept 35, or every town accepts 35 people a year. They go through an intense training if they want to tell their stories. And it's also how to handle their own grief and to be able to speak without re-experiencing the grief every time. And so it's a resource that we provide resources to them for counseling purposes. So people who are affected by gun violence are going through something that most of the rest of us can't understand. So there's a broad support network that we provide as well. We also want to make sure that we elect gun sense candidates. So that was a big effort in Virginia, and I know a couple of you have actually walked out and knocked on doors, and I want to thank you for that. It was a tremendous win recently in Virginia in 2019 with flipping their legislature to a gun sense legislature. Virginia has been a gun running state. The guns you see in Baltimore are coming up 95 and ending up in the streets of Baltimore. And this is going to be so important to support their legislature now that they've been flipped, and to make sure that they put good gun laws in place. So that's our main mission. Our goal: end gun violence in all its forms in the United States. This is something that can be done. We are not Pollyannish about it. We know it's difficult, it's complex, but complexity isn't a reason for not to have action. So what are we looking at in the United States today? And then we'll get to Maryland in just a minute. So in the US, every day, 100 Americans die from gun violence. This is unacceptable at every measure. 2/3 of those are suicide. That leaves the 1/3 at homicide. The 1/3 of homicides, we in the US are 25 times as many as the next developed country. There's no reason. We don't have 25 times the video games. We don't have 25 times the mental health issues. There is something in our permissive gun laws and gun attitude that we need to change. So that's our mission, is to take that number and draw it down to zero. So I want to say that there are a lot of myths out there. So one of our big missions is to address the myths. And the one that is really tough to get around is that people say, look, policy doesn't affect anything. We are going to have this issue. It's just a fact of life. Basically, get over it. The numbers don't say that. So we'll take first a look at New York, that has gradually improved their gun laws, ranging from putting a background check on all gun sales to registering handguns. They have a wide range of gun laws that they put into effect. One law isn't the there isn't one gun law that's going to change everything. You want to do the ones that have the most impact first, and then put in place more and more, and so that there is a more tight network of controlling what is happening. We don't want to take rights away, but we want to couple the rights with the responsibilities again. That has become decoupled. We want to make sure they're together. Now, looking at New York, as you can see, their suicide and homicide rate both dropped over the about 10 years of the study. We look over time. When you put a law in place, there isn't an immediate effect usually, so this is over time. By contrast, you look at Missouri, who's been gradually degrading their gun laws, so that to the point where now they have a permitless carry, which means you can carry around a gun anywhere. Their homicide and suicide rate over the same period of time has gone up 55%. So policies make a difference. We don't have to live under inadequate policies. While the federal government isn't acting, we can take action here in Maryland. So that's what I'd like to take you to next. And just look at where we are in Maryland now. At this point, we have 656 gun deaths for a rate of 10.9 deaths per 100,000 people. When I say that, it sounds so cold. And I want to say this does not reflect the depth of the trauma and injury on our communities and families. It is harmful on every level. This does not even reflect injuries. This is only the death toll. But every time there is a death in a community, it causes a huge rift that takes time to heal and many times can't be healed. So I'm sorry that I have to present them this way. I apologize for that. But this is the way we can get at what can be done. So I just want to acknowledge that I know this doesn't sound like something you should have to say, but we need to do it. So in looking at these numbers, firearms homicide, there's 74% of all homicides involve a gun. It's an especially deadly way of attacking someone. There are, and you look at suicide, 34 hours between gun suicide deaths in Maryland. How does that happen? How does that happen? So let's take a look at how we can take this on. For one thing, we have started to pass some good gun laws. Back in 2013, the Firearms Safety Act that the legislature passed put together a powerful way of dealing with handguns by having background checks and a licensing program. This was very important and went a long way. We, in 2018, had major victories in being able to protect domestic violence victims by assuring that the firearm was going to be removed from the possession of the perpetrator. So this was a big step. There was a loophole in the courts where the courts weren't necessarily asking for that gun to be turned over, and we closed that loophole in 2018. Now we have to monitor the courts to make sure that's happening, and the help is always needed on that front as well. We also put in an extreme risk protection order. This was Dorothy Paugh, who's had her father and son both die by suicide. And in her grief, she was able to power this through in the legislature. And what that provides is that for temporary removal of a firearm after a court order from the possession of the person who may be suffering mental health issues, who may be threatening people, so their immediate family or law enforcement or a health professional. They make a report, goes to a court, the judge decides whether or not to remove that particular weapon from the household. So it's to get help so that they get the time they need to resolve whatever they're going through. It is temporary. They can get the firearm back after they demonstrate that they are not going to be a threat. So it's a very important tool in that suicide number we were talking about. Again, and in Maryland, 2/3 of our gun deaths are suicides. So it's something to keep in mind, and we have some additional information available on that. And bump stocks. I don't know whether you're familiar with the bump stock term. It helps to turn a weapon into an automatic fire weapon. It was used in the Las Vegas shootings, so those were also banned as well. So this year, what are we going to be doing after a very successful 2018? Last year, we attempted to close a loophole in our background check system that involved long guns. Those are shotguns and rifles. Today, there are what's called unlicensed sellers. These are people that are not full-time gun dealers. They don't have to be registered with the federal government. They are, as it says, unlicensed. They're allowed to bring, say, a setup of guns and rifles to a gun show, or to put an ad on the internet and say that I have rifles and shotguns available for sale. Would you like one? So at a gun show, someone can walk up, say, I'd like one of these guns. Yeah, it looks nice. Okay, you look like a good guy. Here's your gun. No background check required. So this was done assuming back in 2013 that there were minimal deaths from long guns. We found since, of course, there have been 30 shooting deaths from long guns in that expanse of time, that 5-year expanse of time, that they're often used in threatening, in domestic violence situations. Here in Montgomery County, Sheriff Popkin has in his vault 75% of the confiscated firearms are indeed long guns. So they're used, that's what you confiscate from a domestic violence situation when you need to move them out of the situation, and that's what they're being used for. So they're not just something that hunters use. So we really need to close this gap. What we want to do is make sure that when you come into a gun show, when you have an online sale, that you must have a background check. So we want to close that loophole, make sure that is done. I want to point out too that in the situation for Jan's brother-in-law, he had come in with a long gun. That's what was used in the Capitol Gazette shooting. He could have been put under an extreme risk protection order if that law was in effect at the time. But even if he had been, he would have been prohibited from possessing or buying a gun. He could have still gone to an unlicensed seller, presented himself as a person who didn't have a record, and obtained a gun. So we need to shut that down. That's been a loophole that we, have lived with and died with for too long. So we're going to go into Annapolis and make the case for this. There's going to be other big issues coming up. So this has worked in our positive way and could work in a negative way. There's been big changes in the leadership right at the top, with the former Speaker of the Senate and the former President of the Senate and Speaker of the House of Delegates, both out of those jobs. There's been new leadership that has come in that is more progressive and receptive to gun violence prevention, which is great, but they're still going to be learning their jobs. They won't have necessarily broad coalitions that they've built yet. So they'll need to hear from us. So that's going to be a big piece of this, is making sure that the leadership hears from us as well as our local representatives. There's education is also on their radar. So with the Kerwin Commission report, Pimlico Racetrack is being discussed as a move for Pimlico. There's transportation issues, marijuana legalization, and gun safety is up there. There's other laws we're going to be tracking as well. Some of our partners are working on child access laws, as well as appropriations for gun violence interruption programs in Baltimore. So we may jump in on those depending on how fast or slow our legislation goes. So stay informed. These local activities are really important. Your local delegates and senators are working on all this. So we, again, have to keep in touch. When you get those annoying newsletters in your electronic mail from your local delegate and delete them, before you do, take a look and see where they're having coffee or breakfast, and just go and say, hey, I support gun safety legislation. What do you think? And here in Montgomery County, we're really lucky because they are on board. But we want them to fight for it. It's like, will you go to bat for us? Will you go to the chair of the committee and talk to them about this? We don't just say, will you support us anymore? That only got us so far last year. Everybody was supporting it, but we couldn't move it fast enough through the leadership. So there's again, a change in the wind. We want to be able to get them with our change. Let's see, does there anything? Okay, there's Maryland Matters to stay informed really easily, and MarylandReporter.com, and you can just check in and go on those. And for specific gun violence prevention information, the trace.org is a really nice network. You can get that once a week or daily, depending on your ability to manage your email. So what you can do. First of all, we have an Advocacy Day coming up on January 30th. We go to Annapolis and have a rally, have a press conference, and show our strength to our legislators, and we go and meet with our legislators. It's a fantastic day, very well organized. We need help in advance of that to make phone calls, invite people, then confirm them. So even if you can't attend that day, we still need your help. You can directly contact your legislators, which is really important. You can find your legislators' names if you don't know your district by going to openstates.org or mgaledge.maryland.gov. That's their new website. Take a moment to understand that website. It's new. I'm still figuring it out. Get friends. And also, if someone is going off to Annapolis and maybe has children that need to be picked up after school, offer to do that pickup if you can't make that trip. Attend or participate in hearings. We do this all the time. It's really important to just show up and keep showing up. We write letters to the editor, so if you're good at writing, we welcome your help in doing that. And again, show up. So again, I mentioned the helping in advance. We do big phone banks, or you can call from home. When you attend, you just bring a friend, bring an ID, you go to Annapolis, and we have the day all laid out for you. If you can spend the whole day, that's great. If you can only give 2 hours, that's fine. We can use you. You can help put the pizza out for everybody who's there all day. We need your help. So just to give you an idea of what we are going to be writing postcards for after this program, there's people on the Judiciary Committee and Judicial Proceedings Committee in the Senate. These are the people we're going to be contacting. If you know of someone, say, who lives in Harford County, who's a constituent, it's great to give them a call and say, hey, your senator or delegate is on this committee that's really important. Could you write them a note for me? Or could you write them a note and on your own behalf and tell them that this is important to you? So it's about spreading out through those networks. I'm not going to go through all these. I'm sorry, this is such a busy slide. Just to go to the bottom, the House passed H.R. 8, which is the bipartisan background check bill. We want to have this nationwide. Until that happens, again, we're working on it in Annapolis. We're not going to wait for them. It's being held up, but we want to have that. So we regularly go to hearings on all these bills, and that's what we keep doing. Again, showing up. H.R. 8 is stalled in the Senate. We want to move it. So if you are a DC resident rather than living in Maryland, you're welcome to write to Mitch McConnell and say this is important to the whole country. Other things that we have going on, if you would like to help us out at other times of the year, we have GSAN, which is the Gun Sense Action Network. What that does is mobilize people who are at home calling to other states. Once you're connected to a constituent in a state, perhaps with a senator who's going to be voting on H.R. 8, and prompting them to take that, we'll contact the constituent in that state, explain what the issue is, and then ask the constituent if they would like to be connected to their senator's offices. They'll say yes, and you just push a button and connect them. It's awesome. So we'd love to have people who are good at phone calling, interested in working from home. This is a great way to do it. We set up call times. You get a list of people to call. It's awesome. We have our Be Smart program. We always need presenters. We go around to schools, doctors' offices, and present the Be Smart program. There's training, and you walk in and present, and it's a fantastic organization. It's connected. It is a 501c3 organization. It is fully nonprofit. And we have extreme risk protection order awareness. Again, we want to spread the word throughout Maryland that we have that in place. So finally, history is made by those who show up. Yeah, you got to show up a lot, but you can help people who are showing up even if you can't make it yourself. Again, we're going to go back to Advent and just think a moment about preparation. We want to prepare for doing something important. We want to prepare for a future down the road where we don't have to worry about active shooter drills in schools, where we don't have to worry about going into a mall, a concert, a theater, a movie, a place of worship, and look for the exits. We want to have a future where we are free of gun violence, and we can do it together. So I want to thank you once again for your attention. I want to thank Jan, who's going to be speaking now, for her courage in speaking out about what she's been through. And we'll look forward to your questions after her presentation. Can we hear it?
I can be loud. I can. How's that? Oh, that sounds like that's on. Okay, great. Thank you all so very, very much for being here. As Elaine said, let me echo, I really appreciate everyone's attention. I know what a busy time it is. And I also want to say again how much my family appreciates being part of the St. John's community. The number one thing that I appreciate about Moms Demand Action is that they make it so much easier to show up. The organization does incredible work to give survivors a voice and provide others who care about this issue the information and tools they need to engage in a way that makes a difference. Up until about a year and a half ago, gun violence was an issue that I cared about, but I didn't get involved with directly. My daughters are now 11 and 13, which means their school years have taken place in the post-Sandy Hook, post-Parkland world with active shooter drills